For most reviews of premium laptops, the reviewers review relatively high-tier laptops with high-end specs. And Core i5, Core i7, 16 gigs of RAM, if not more, 512 gigs SSD. But a lot of times the entry-level model of a laptop starts at a lot lower price than those systems being reviewed. And so I've always wondered, what do those systems feel like? Now, the common knowledge is you usually shouldn't buy the entry-level model of a system because it's not going to perform as fast as you'd want. And often there's lower end systems that would perform a lot better. In order to find out, I bought the entry model of the Dell XPS 7390. This laptop starts at $799, and this system has 4 gigs of RAM, 128 gigs of storage, and an Intel Core i3 10th generation processor. Should you ever consider buying a system like this? Let's talk about it. When you're paying $800 for a laptop with a Core i3, generally you can assume that a lot of your money is going to the design of the laptop. And the 7390 is no slouch for design. This is an excellently designed, compact, sleek, metal, aluminum, and carbon fiber build laptop. Every single piece of it is super well finished. The design of the XPS line hasn't changed too much since they released the 9350 in 2015, but that's really a testament to how far ahead they were in terms of design. The aluminum body and carbon fiber keyboard rest are both excellent and feel incredibly premium, and are a good departure from the aluminum build that a lot of other systems have nowadays. The top panel and bottom panel contribute to a very rigid build, and so this thing feels like you could use it as a blunt force object. And I know from unfortunate experience that this can handle a drop or two. I would argue that the carbon fiber keyboard deck is subjectively more comfortable than putting your hands on cold metal, but it does attract grease and fingerprints pretty poorly. One of the concerns that I often have with more compact laptops like this is if the front of the keyboard deck digs into my palms because there's not enough space for my palms to rest when typing. And thankfully I can say that there's enough space here for at least my hands to fit just fine. Even after owning several Dell XPSs with the infinity display with microscopic bezels, I still am impressed every single day with just how small they are and how immersive the screen looks because of them. But despite loving the compactness that those tiny bezels create in theory, I don't find that the XPS 13 fits into too many more places than a larger laptop like the Surface laptop. And so the real benefit is more in the feel than in the actual utility of the size. On the display front, the base model 13-inch 1080p display is actually pretty incredible for just being 1080p. There's no touch, which is frustrating for me because unfortunately you have to pay extra to not only get a touch option, but also upgrade to 4K. There is no 1080p option or anything in between. As a result, you're actively choosing to sacrifice your battery life in order to have a 4K display, even when you might just want that touchscreen. On newer models of the XPS 13, Dell actually stretched out the aspect ratio downwards, so it's now a 16:10 aspect ratio, which gives you a little bit more space. But I find that I actually prefer the 16:9 display. I might be in the minority here. But like I said, this system isn't that much more compact than a larger 13-inch laptop, and so if I had my own choice, I would choose maybe some Goldilocks model between the 13-inch and 15-inch, maybe a 14-inch model that would give quite a bit more screen real estate while not giving up the compactness and the lightness that you get in this model versus the 15-inch. I find Dell's XPS keyboards to be some of the most consistent keyboards out there. While I would prefer slightly more spacing on this model, I still think this keyboard is absolutely excellent and gives great feedback, great amount of travel, and the layout is standard enough that I'm comfortable typing on it. Now personally, I don't think this keyboard is quite as comfortable to type on as the Surface laptops or Surface Books, but that's just a personal preference. And if I had one more gripe, I'd say that the layout is a little bit different than I'd like because I would prefer if the Option key was not hidden under the right control button. Dell also makes some of the best trackpads on laptops. I think generally most manufacturers have caught up to Dell over the years, but I still think this trackpad is good enough for me to not need anything more. I know that a lot of people prefer a larger trackpad, but personally, even something this size, I don't find myself bumping up against the edges when I'm scrolling or using gestures, which is perfectly fine for me. Now we get to the fun part, the specs and performance. Now, this model is so low end that Dell doesn't actually even sell it on their website anymore. Their entry-level $799 model has 8 gigs of RAM, where this only has 4. And people are going to say on and on that 4 gigs of RAM isn't enough, 8 gigs of RAM isn't enough, 16 gigs of RAM isn't enough, and that number is going to keep on moving higher and higher as applications get more complicated. But I think after using this, I can safely say the biggest bottleneck to the performance is that 4 gigs of RAM. And that wasn't always the case. Generally, if I was just using this device for web browsing, writing up documents, drafting up articles, or working in Excel, this did just fine. Now, I had to be careful how many applications I kept in the background, and generally whenever I ran a software update, the whole rest of the system would bog down immediately. But other than that, it was a quick, little, easy web browsing machine. Over the last few years, a lot of the growth that we've seen in processor performance hasn't come from single core performance, but instead multi-core performance from Intel and AMD adding more and more cores to their processors. For laptops, most of this move started in Intel's 8th generation in 2017 with their quad-core i5 and i7 processors, and they've since only added more. But keep in mind, not all programs take advantage of that many cores and rely more on single core performance. So compared to an i5 8th generation from 2017, this Core i3 has 15% better performance, which means this is going to feel perfectly fast for most people. But as soon as you do get into those programs with multi-core performance, this has half of the performance of that same processor. So generally for me, I have avoided Core i3s, but this is a relatively fast Core i3 and the performance was massively better than any of the experience I had on the Surface Go 2 a couple months ago. So ultimately, the thing that's going to drag down the system is the RAM. And unfortunately, a couple of years ago, Dell stopped including user upgradable RAM in their XPSs. And so you're stuck with that 4 gigs of RAM for the life of the laptop, which is really unfortunate, especially as programs get more and more RAM intensive. You might have already come to the conclusion that buying a system with a Core i3, 4 gigs of RAM, and 128 gigs of storage is dumb. And I perfectly understand that. But I've started to think about who would buy this system. Well, one potential buyer is wealthier parents who have been asked by their kids to go buy them an XPS, and they really don't know the difference between a Core i3 and a Core i5, so they just buy the cheapest thing they can see. Now, those kids might be disappointed when they realize that this system doesn't have high enough specs to even run Fortnite. Alternatively, this system might be perfect for a company that is buying its sales force new laptops. And while you would wonder why would a company pay $800 for such low-end specs, well, a lot of sales forces only access cloud-based applications that don't require a lot of processing power on the actual device. And typically, higher-end systems like XPSs have longer lifespans, fewer bugs, and more premium support when you do need it. Many companies also get bulk discounts paired with that support in order to make that $800 price tag more bearable. Now, the obvious answer for most of the people watching is you're probably better off spending your $800 elsewhere, whether it be with another manufacturer, the refurbished market, or one of the lower end systems like the Inspirons of the world, where you can get higher specs for a much lower price. If I had to get a system myself, this isn't what I'd buy, but it has been really nice just keeping it around the house for a really quick web browsing device that actually runs pretty well. Thank you for watching InnoIso. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and let me know down in the comments what you think about this device and whether Dell should even sell a Core i3 model at all. Be sure to keep an eye out for our future reviews of laptops, and I'll catch you in the next one.